In the heart of the ruined village, everyone had buried their stories long ago. The useless farmer, Kael, was sent there by his own family to vanish, forgotten. No soldiers patrolled that desolate land, no coin clinked in the wind. Yet beneath his feet lay not dead soil, but the remnants of ancient warfare, broken blades, buried shields, old bones, one sword still glowing with dragon's heat. Kael, mocked for his so-called harvest skill, kneels. And there, from the dirt, his crops did not produce food. They forged something far greater, triple S weapons, sharper than nightmares. At sunset, the fields behind Blackacre moved like something alive. The village had no real wall. The old palisade had rotted through in 3 places, and the gate leaned on one hinge like it was too tired to keep pretending. Behind it, a few dozen villagers stood with farm tools, kitchen knives, and wooden spears. Their hands shook, their faces were pale. Most of them had never fought trained soldiers before. Kael stood in front of them, with mud on his boots and a broken hoe in his hands. He looked nothing like a noble hero. His coat was torn at the shoulder, his left sleeve was burned near the cuff. His face was bruised from the fight that had already reached the village square. If someone saw him from a distance, they might think he was a desperate farmhand trying to defend a bad harvest. That was exactly what the soldiers thought. Marshal Orvin Pike had arrived with royal papers and iron-coated men. He did not come to negotiate. He came to seize Blackacre, inventory its strange crops, and remove anyone who stood in his way. Behind him waited Cassian Veyron, Kael's older brother, smiling like a man watching a problem finally clean itself up. The road in front of Blackacre was packed with soldiers. Their boots crushed the wet dirt into black paste. Their spear points caught the last red light of the evening. They had expected starving peasants, a frightened boy, and maybe a few strange plants worth collecting. Instead, the field watched them. The first row of grass leaned toward the road. It was not ordinary grass. Each stalk was thin, bright green at the base and silver at the tip. When the wind moved through it, the field did not whisper like wheat. It rang softly, like hundreds of blades touching in the dark. Pike lifted his sealed order and shouted that Blackacre had failed its tax obligations. He accused the village of producing illegal weapons, hiding military assets, and resisting crown inspection. His voice carried well because men like Pike practiced sounding lawful while stealing from people who had no power. Kael did not answer right away. He looked over his shoulder at the village. Mira Thorne stood near the well with one hand pressed against her old leg injury and the other wrapped around a spear. Null crouched on the broken watchtower with a sling and a pouch of stones. The carpenter held a hammer. The old woman who had cried when the well returned held a kitchen knife in both hands. 3 weeks ago, these people had not trusted Kael enough to give him a full cup of water. Now they stood behind him. Pike gave the order to advance. The soldiers stepped forward. That was when the first row of grass stood upright. The movement was too clean to be wind. Thin stalks snapped straight with a sound like drawn swords. Hundreds of silver edges pointed toward the road. A few soldiers laughed, because laughing is easier than admitting a field just aimed at you. Then the wind passed through the grass and cut Pike's banner into strips. The laughter died. Kael raised his right hand. The harvest mark on his palm glowed faintly through the dirt and blood. Beneath his boots, thick black roots tightened around buried stones. Red fruit in the center field began to steam. Water flowed through hidden vines from the restored well, spreading under the soil like veins. Cassian's smile finally cracked. Kael looked small in front of the soldiers. He still had no aura, he still had no noble sword, he still had the same skill his family had mocked in front of every elder in House Veyron. But the field answered him. The grass leaned forward. The roots locked together. The red fruit glowed brighter, like coals waking inside a forge. Thank you for sharing that powerful line. It seems like a dramatic and vivid moment where the character's quiet action leads to something powerful. The earth opening and a response from Blackacre. If you're crafting a scene or developing a story, this could be a great starting point, showing how words, gestures, and silence can hold so much power. If you'd like to explore more about this scene or get additional feedback, I'm here to help. 3 weeks earlier, Kael Veyron stood beneath the glass dome of House Veyron and waited for his life to be measured. Every noble child received a skill at 17. The ceremony was supposed to be sacred, but in noble houses sacred things always became political. Families did not gather only to celebrate, they gathered to calculate. A sword skill meant military value. A command skill meant leadership. Elemental magic meant marriage offers, alliances, and a stronger family position at court. Even a simple crafting skill could raise a family's wealth if it was rare enough. Kael knew all of this because he had spent his childhood being useful in quiet ways. He was the third son of House Veyron. That meant no one expected him to inherit the main title. His oldest brother Cassian had been treated like the future since he could walk. His second brother had enough talent with mounted combat to make generals nod with approval. Kael was the one people forgot in rooms. He copied ledgers, he sorted grain reports, he helped old servants carry seed sacks when the house steward was not looking. He learned which fields produced well and which tenants were always one bad storm away from hunger. None of that mattered under the glass dome. Power mattered. The awakening stone stood in the center of the hall on a black marble platform. Its surface was smooth and pale, but inside it moved a slow golden light. One by one, young nobles placed their hands on it and waited for the skill name to appear. Some received modest gifts and bowed with relief. Some received strong ones and walked away with their backs straighter than before. Then Cassian gave a demonstration, even though he had awakened years earlier. House Veyron loved reminders of its own superiority. He stepped into the ring with 3 instructors and issued a single command. The men moved instantly, their bodies responding before thought. Cassian's skill was not loud, it was worse than loud. It was control. The elders applauded. Kael's father smiled. Kael tried not to envy him, but envy still sat in his chest like a stone. When his name was called, the hall quieted. Kael walked to the platform and placed his hand on the awakening stone. The surface was cold at first, then warmth climbed through his palm and up his arm. Golden light gathered under his skin. For one heartbeat, he felt something vast and patient stir beneath the ceremony hall. He thought maybe this was it. Maybe he would finally receive something undeniable. Then letters appeared above the stone. Harvest. The hall stayed silent for half a second. Then someone laughed. A cousin near the back asked if Kael would bless cabbages for the winter banquet. Another said House Veyron had finally produced a noble field hand. The jokes came quickly because nobles smelled weakness the way wolves smell blood. Kael kept his hand on the stone even after the glow faded. He stared at the word. Harvest. It sounded plain, useful, small. Not a battle skill, not magic, not command, nothing that could stand beside Cassian, nothing that could make his father look at him with pride. His father did not laugh. That almost made it worse. He simply looked tired. Practical, the old lord said at last. Disappointing, but practical. The words landed harder than mockery. Cassian descended from the heir's platform with perfect sympathy arranged across his face. His armor was polished, his hair was neat, his smile was gentle enough for witnesses and cruel enough for Kael to understand. A farming skill, Cassian said quietly. Kael wanted to answer. He wanted to say the skill had felt deeper than the word. He wanted to explain the strange pull under the stone, like roots moving through buried history. But he had no proof, and in House Veyron no one listened to weakness explain itself. The ceremony moved on. Kael remained beside the platform for a moment too long, then stepped down while the servants avoided his eyes. The next child awakened a minor flame skill, and the hall applauded like nothing had happened. That night, Kael returned to his room and opened the old agriculture ledgers he had once studied for comfort. Crop rotations, soil notes, tax eels, tenant complaints, things nobody praised but everyone needed. He pressed his glowing palm against the page and whispered the skill name. Harvest. Nothing happened. No light, no miracle, no hidden power revealing itself because the world felt sorry for him. Kael closed the ledger and laughed once, bitterly. He thought the ceremony had shown him the whole truth. It had not. The awakening stone had named the door. It had not shown what waited behind it. The next morning, Cassian invited Kael to the map room. That alone told Kael something was wrong. The map room was not a family room, it was a place for borders, contracts, marriages, and quiet threats. The long table in the center showed every village under Veyron authority. Small iron markers represented tax stations. Silver pins marked mines. Red thread traced roads that mattered. Places with no value were left near the edges, fading under dust. Kael had entered the room only twice in his life, both times to deliver documents. Now Cassian stood beside the table with a rolled deed sealed in black wax. 2 witnesses waited near the door. A family steward held an ink box. Their presence meant the discussion was already over. Cassian greeted him warmly. That made Kael more careful. His brother spoke about responsibility, family honor, and the need for every member of House Veyron to serve according to his talents. He said a skill like harvest might be embarrassing in the capital, but useful on the frontier. He said their father had decided to show mercy instead of sending Kael away without purpose. Then he pushed the deed across the table. Blackacre. Kael knew the name from tax ledgers nobody else cared to read. A border village near the old eastern road. Once it had supplied grain and ironwood to military outposts. Then the road shifted south, raiders burned the storehouses, and the well collapsed. The last 3 appointed administrators had left within a year. The latest report said fewer than 40 residents remained. The land had debt attached to it, unpaid taxes, repair obligations, defense failures. A noble lord could inherit a village like that and still be ruined by it. Cassian called it a gift. He said Kael would become Lord of Blackacre, revive its fields, and prove that House Veyron could turn even disappointment into service. The witnesses nodded. No one looked Kael in the eye. Then Cassian explained the deadline. At the next royal tax collection, Blackacre had to present payment, production reports, and proof of local defense readiness. If the village failed, the crown could seize the land. Its people would be displaced. Its appointed lord would be charged with neglecting noble territory. Kael felt the shape of the trap close around him. If he refused the appointment, he would confirm every insult from the ceremony. He would be the useless third son too proud to work dirt. If he accepted, he would be alone on a dying border village with no supplies, no soldiers, and a tax deadline designed to crush him. Cassian placed a hand on Kael's shoulder. The gesture looked brotherly from the doorway. "Brother," Cassian said, "a farmer should be grateful for dirt." Kael looked at the deed. He could hear the servants outside the room. He could feel the witnesses waiting for his reaction. Pride was a dangerous thing, but it was the last piece of dignity he had left. So he signed. Cassian's smile widened by a fraction. By dawn, 1 cart had been prepared for him. Prepared was a generous word. It had 2 sacks of barley, 1 box of old tools, a patched canvas cover, and a driver paid only to reach the border road. No guard escort followed. No family member came to say goodbye. Kael stood at the courtyard gate and looked back once. His father did not appear. Cassian watched from the balcony, one hand resting on the stone rail. He raised that hand in farewell, polite enough for anyone watching. Kael climbed onto the cart. The wheels started moving. House Veyron grew smaller behind him, all glass and stone and banners. For the first few miles, Kael hated himself for hoping someone would call him back. No one did. Beneath a brooding sky, the road east grew treacherous as the day wore on. Smooth paving dissolved into packed dirt, which cracked and splintered into broken ground. Farms became barren. Watchposts stood abandoned. By evening, the driver halted at a crossroads and refused to go farther. "Blackacre Road eats wheels," the man warned, "and things come down from the hills after dark." Kael paid him with one of the last coins in his purse and took the cart himself. He had never driven one alone, and the horse sensed it and resented him for it. By the time Blackacre's crooked watchtower rose on the horizon, rain was trickling through the canvas. Kael's hands were blistered, his boots soaked. The cart had lost a crate of tools into a ditch miles back. Still, he straightened his coat before entering the village. He was a lord now, lord of mud, debt, and broken roofs. Kael sat with his head in his hands for a long time. The weight of the village's condition hung heavy as dusk fell over the broken roofs and leaning walls. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling loose timber and stirring shadows. Still, he wasn't yet ready to give up. There had to be some way forward, some small step to rebuild. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd talk more with Mira. She seemed rooted in the reality of this place, and maybe, just maybe, together they could find something. The creator weaves a tale of quiet desperation. Kael's struggle in the garden, the doubt creeping in after each failure, paints a vivid picture of feeling outmatched by forces beyond his control. The introduction of the boy, a nimble, desperate figure, adds tension, and the lurking creature, silent and hungry, brings an ominous sense of danger to an already fragile moment. Now, as Kael's skill reaches its limit, we feel the weight of that question hanging in the air. Is he ordinary, or can he finally awaken what's inside him? The beast lurched forward, a dark shadow with sharp fangs. It moved like a predator long hardened by survival. Its ribs jutted against weathered skin, patched with rusted metal from old days of battle. Border beasts like this fed only on what was left behind, leather, bone, even the rust of old swords. But this time the scavenger boy was ready for something else. As the boy scrambled back, his torn sack spilled scrap over the mud. The boy reached for his blade, but the wolf was already in motion. Kael moved instinctively. His fingers found a broken sword half buried by the smithy, a blade as orange as rust, its handle rotted into wire. The sword was weak, but Kael didn't know that could matter. His harvest mark flared, not with fire, but with a deep recognition. The sharp edge of the blade, what it had been, what it could be, filled his mind. He didn't need a spell, he needed focus. He thought of the edge, the weeds choking the yard, and the weeds burst forward, sharp green stalks rising where there was only dirt. They flashed and cut. The beast fled. Silence. The villagers watched. Kael didn't know how to explain what had happened. He only knew it was about the edge and the harvest. But control was the next question, and control takes trust. That would come later. Kael tried to repeat the result with another rusted nail. The sprout that came out was sharp enough to cut skin, but weak enough to snap between fingers. He tried with a broken horseshoe and got a twisted vine that curled around his wrist until Mira cut it away. He tried with a kitchen knife and grew grass that smelled like onions because the knife had spent more years in soup than battle. Nall laughed at that one. Kael almost laughed too. It was the first normal sound he had heard since arriving. That evening, he sat outside the manor with his ledger open and wrote new notes. Harvest extracts properties. Object history matters. Soil carries connection. Intent affects growth. Dangerous without testing. Then he added one more line. Blackacre may not be dead. He looked across the fields. For the first time, the black soil did not look empty. It looked like a closed book, buried under mud, waiting for someone to learn how to read it. And so, Kael took a step back, his frustration fading as Mira's words sank in. He realized that the land's old memories weren't something to control but to understand. Together, they adjusted their methods, treating the soil with respect, careful of what ancient forces lay beneath. And bit by bit, the land yielded to knowledge rather than fear. Later, she told him more about Blackacre's history. The valley had once been the site of an imperial retreat. A dragon had been brought down here, so had an army. The empire collapsed afterward, but the battlefield never truly emptied. Scavengers came for metal, priests came for bones, settlers came for land. Everyone took something. Nobody listened to what remained. Kael began to understand his limitation. Harvest could extract hidden properties, but he had to understand them before he replanted them. If he pulled blindly, the soil gave him more than he asked for. A weapon was not only edge, it was fear, violence, history, and the hand that used it. A shield was not only endurance, it was panic, impact, and sometimes cowardice. The land was full, but full did not mean safe. By the end of the week, Kael had 3 useful discoveries. Bladegrass could produce sharp, disposable cutting strips. Charcoal squash could hold heat through cold nights. Shield-fed roots could grow tough enough to reinforce weak fences. None of that solved the biggest problem. Blackacre was still thirsty. Without water, every miracle would wither, and the old well in the square remained a dead mouth packed with stone. Blackacre's greatest enemy was not Cassian, not yet. It was water. The old well had collapsed during a raid 2 years earlier. The villagers had tried to clear it, but the shaft was blocked with stone, burned timber, and packed mud. After one man died in the attempt, they stopped digging. Since then, families carried water from a stream half a mile away. In spring, the stream was muddy. In summer, it shrank. In winter, it froze at the edges and left children carrying buckets with blue fingers. Kael could grow sharp grass, warm squash, and roots tough enough to patch fences. None of that mattered if people still rationed water by the cup. Null found the answer by accident. He returned from the stream with wet boots, a stolen apple core, and a smooth blue stone he had pulled from the riverbed. A pale line ran through the stone like frozen water. Null thought it looked valuable. Mira thought it looked like a rock. Kael touched it and nearly dropped it. His harvest mark pulled hard. The property inside the stone was not water exactly. It was movement. Direction. The patient insistence of a river finding a path around anything that tried to stop it. Flow. Kael carried the stone to the well and stood over the broken shaft for a long time. Mira told him not to get hopeful too quickly. The blockage was deep. They had no proper crew, no lifting rig, no spare rope strong enough for major work. Even if water still existed below, reaching it could take weeks. Kael did not have weeks. The tax deadline was moving toward them, whether Blackacre was ready or not. He planted gourd seeds around the well in a wide circle. Under each seed he buried tiny chips from the river stone. Then he placed his palm against the damp soil and tried to focus not on water, but on passage. Not break. Not force. Move. Harvest answered. The seeds cracked open, pale vines grew downward instead of upward. They slid into gaps between stones wrapped around buried timber and squeezed through places no tool could reach. The village heard faint grinding under the square all afternoon. People came out of their houses one by one. No one spoke loudly. Hope was treated carefully in Blackacre, like a flame in wind. As sunset came, the vines thickened. Their roots pulsed like muscle. Mud shifted around the well stones. Once the whole square trembled, and Mira ordered everyone back. Kael kept his palm on the ground until his arm shook. Flow was different from Edge. Edge wanted release. Flow wanted continuation. The property tried to move through everything, including him. His thoughts blurred. His heartbeat seemed to run down into the roots and come back colder. Null held a lantern over him and kept asking if he was dying. Kael told him to stop being dramatic. Null said that was not an answer. Near midnight something cracked under the well. The sound rolled up through the shaft like thunder trapped in stone. Then came silence. For one awful moment Kael thought he had failed. Then water struck the bottom. At first it was a splash, then a rush. Then clear water rose cold and bright in the old well. The square erupted, not with cheering at first, with disbelief. People pressed forward, then stopped, afraid the miracle might vanish if touched too quickly. Mira lowered a bucket. When it came up full, the old woman nearest the well drank one mouthful and began crying before she could swallow. A man filled a cup for his daughter. She stared at it like treasure. Null splashed his face and declared he had always believed in Lord Mudhands. He collapsed, sitting against the well stones, while villagers formed a line. For the first time since he arrived, people looked at him without contempt or resignation. Not everyone smiled, some still kept distance, but the shape of the village changed that night. Water meant cooking. Water meant planting. Water meant washing wounds, mixing mortar, and surviving summer. The next morning, Kael used shield fragments to strengthen root vegetables and charcoal warmth to protect seedlings from cold nights. With water restored, those experiments finally became food. Beans thickened, grain stood straighter, warm squash ripened in half-dead gardens where nothing had survived the previous season. Mira brought a bowl of stew that evening. It was thin stew, mostly beans and stubborn hope, but it was the first meal Blackacre had cooked without counting every spoonful. Kael thanked her. Mira only said, "Don't make me regret feeding a noble." That was the closest thing to approval she had offered. Kael took it. For a brief moment survival felt possible. Then trade made Blackacre visible, and visibility brought predators. As the sun set over Blackacre, The village stood on the brink, on the edge of transformation. Kael and Mira had turned desperation into strategy. Neighbors once at odds now shared tasks. Old wounds began to heal. And with every slice of bladegrass, each sharpened shield root plank, hope took root once more in the village's soil. But echoes of the past lingered, and with them, the challenge of trust, now slowly growing from the cracks of the past. And that's where, for better or worse, our story rests. Under the dark, starry skies, Blackacre's soil produced tools as sharp as forged blades. Rumors whispered faster than carts could roll, propelled by the allure of profit. Some saw trade, others taxes. But Cassian saw danger. He had sent Kael to Blackacre as a planted flaw that would self-destruct. Instead, the village was flourishing, credit to Kael's growing reputation. That could not stand. So Cassian chose a path secret even as it was sharp. No soldiers, only men who moved like hunger, wielding knives. The bandits came during a rainstorm. They did not attack like an army. They came like rot, slipping through broken fences and drainage ditches while thunder covered their steps. One cut loose 2 goats to draw people away from the storehouse. Another poured oil on the seed shed. A third crawled near the bladegrass with thick blankets wrapped around his arms. They had heard enough rumors to be careful, not careful enough to avoid Blackacre, but careful enough to hurt it. The alarm reeds screamed first. Their hollow stems caught the wind and produced a sharp wail that sliced through the rain. Null woke before Kael did and kicked his door open, shouting that the road was moving. Kael ran into the mud barefoot. The seed shed was already burning. Mira stood near the well, barking orders so hard that frightened villagers moved before they remembered to be scared. She sent children to the manor cellar, old people to carry water, and every able hand to the square. Her bad leg dragged in the mud, but her voice held the village together. The first bandit rushed the road and hit the bladegrass. He screamed and fell back with his trousers cut to ribbons. For 1 second, Kael thought the defense would hold. Then the next 2 attackers threw wet blankets over the sharp rows and crossed on top of them. Kael felt the field panic through harvest. That was the only way to describe it. The bladegrass was alive enough to respond, but not smart enough to understand strategy. Fire, pressure, pain, fear, all of it came through the roots as raw sensation. The field wanted to cut everything, the vines wanted to grab everything, the warm squash wanted to release heat until the rain steamed. Kael tried to command it all at once. That was a mistake. A burning arrow struck the squash row near the storehouse. The shells cracked from sudden heat and burst, throwing sparks across wet straw. Villagers screamed. Null dragged a child away from a falling beam. Mira took a knife in the shoulder and still broke the attacker's jaw with her cane. Kael forced harvest harder. The ground answered too deeply. For a moment, the field vanished from his sight. He stood somewhere else, mud up to his knees, smoke in his lungs, shields breaking under axes, men screaming orders in a language he did not know, a spear flying through red air, a dragon's shadow crossing the valley. Soldiers dying while still trying to obey commands that no living officer remembered. Blackacre's soil remembered war. Harvest opened that memory like a wound. Kael saw rows of soldiers who were no longer there. He heard commands layered under the rain. Advance, hold, burn, break, die. The bladegrass shuddered. For 1 terrifying second, it turned toward the villagers. Mira saw it happen. She threw herself into the mud and slammed her spear shaft across Kael's arm. The pain snapped him back. He released the bone ash he had accidentally pulled from the soil. The bladegrass folded down, confused, but no longer hostile. Shieldroot caught the nearest bandit by the ankle, and Rusk finished the fight with a hammer to the man's helmet. By dawn, the raid was over. The bandits fled with less than they came for, but victory tasted bitter. The seed shed was half burned. 3 houses had damaged roofs. Mira's shoulder bled through the bandage. 2 villagers stared at the fields with the same fear they had shown on Kael's first day. Kael could not blame them. Living weapons could save Blackacre. In the dim morning light, Kael found himself helping repair the damaged shed, all while avoiding the probing gazes of those around him. Null, silent as ever, trailed behind him, his presence heavier than any questions. By afternoon, Kael discovered Null sitting by the broken bladegrass, hands delicately removing ash from the roots. When Null asked if they were still going to win, Kael's heart twisted. He wanted to say yes, to be a hero, to turn fear into certainty, but he looked out over the burned field and told the truth. Not like this. That evening Mira arrived at the manor, her arm wrapped tight in an expression colder than the rain. It would have been easier if she had accused him of failure, but that was not her way. She said instead, "You reached into a grave and expected only tools to come out." Kael had no response. Mira pressed on, explaining that the battlefield wasn't just made of metal, it was made of orders, terror, loyalty, rage, and old magic. And if Kael wanted to use them, he had to decide what the field was loyal to before it decided for itself. That's the idea that stayed with him. The field needed a structure, a boundary, a promise, a charter rooted in the village itself. But before Kael could solve that, Null made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden under the old church was Null's piece of scrap, a broken spearhead black as burned glass. And when Kael touched it, the field of harvest burned hotter than ever before. As the story unfolds, the spearhead's presence defies all expectations. The metal, seemingly ordinary but imbued with an ancient power, reacts to Kael's touch. Mira's worry reveals layers of history, the burning valley, the dragon's death, the stories that most dismiss. Emberfruit grows from the act of planting the spearhead in the scorched ground, with seeds cracking and the vines crawling out, all colored by the heat of the past. The fire inside the fruit follows its own rules. It burns precisely, and when it's gone, it leaves only ash. This is the new beginning. This is how the old fire comes alive when touched by hands willing to see beyond the ordinary. And so Kael smiles, knowing nothing can remain the same. Understood. Let me provide the narration tone for what you've shared. It could heat metal without a forge. It could burn controlled lines through wet wood. It could power defenses without setting the whole village on fire, if handled carefully. More importantly, it gave Kael a missing piece. Bladegrass could cut, shieldroot could hold, flowvines could move water, emberfruit could control heat. The pieces were no longer separate tricks. They were a system. Over the next days, Blackacre became a workshop. Kael used emberfruit to repair the smithy without enough coal. Rusk learned to heat iron straps by pressing fruit pulp into clay channels. Mira tested defensive layouts where shieldroot walls guided enemies into bladegrass lanes. Flowvines carried water under emberfruit rows to stop accidental spread. Every success came with risk. One emberfruit burned through a stone basin when Null poked it with a nail. One shieldroot wall grew too thick and trapped a goat until half the village had to dig it out. A bladegrass row exposed to too much dragon heat became brittle and exploded into sharp silver dust when struck. Kael wrote every failure down. He was no longer trying to prove that harvest was strong. He was trying to make it safe enough for people to live beside it. That distinction mattered. Cassian would not have understood it. Cassian saw land as value, people as tools, and power as something that had to answer bloodline. If he learned what Blackacre could produce now, he would not simply destroy it, he would take it. The seizure order arrived 2 mornings later, stamped by the crown, countersigned by House Veyron, and carried by Marshal Orvin Pike. The village stood still, each person locked in their breath as Kael approached the stone. The murmurs fell silent. He knelt and pressed his palm against the weathered surface. This was the nucleus of their legacy, the one thing that had remained since the old wars, the anchor of a village that refused to break. Cassian's voice rang out, cold and impatient. "There's no point, you know you've already lost." But Kael did not flinch. Slowly he lifted his head. "Not yet," he whispered. And the villagers understood. This fight was not over. In the twilight hush, Kael's hands traced the words on the ancient stone. The land responded, bladegrass quivering, root tightening, vines creeping, emberfruit glowing. And as Cassian drew his sword, The village of Blackacre stood on the edge of its next reckoning, choosing its side in the quiet dawn. This is the moment Kael grasps what must come next. Cassian's aura-wrapped sword presses forward, slicing through bladegrass rows. The air hums with tension as the roots recoil. Kael stands his ground, breathing heavy, pulling that single stalk of bladegrass from the mud, ready to weave his delicate balance, control through understanding. In the quiet aftermath, the square remained tense, the weight of the confrontation still lingering in the air. And as Kael's hand rested on the charter stone, the villagers slowly exhaled. They had witnessed more than a battle between brothers. They had seen a village stand its ground. Yet as night fell over Blackacre, Kael could not shake the feeling that something deeper was stirring beneath the surface. The broken spearhead pulsed in the earth, anchoring ancient memories. And now, something old stirred, something vast. A root network wrapping around the village, a dragon's forgotten legacy, waking to life beneath their feet. The next morning, Marshal Pike's broken carriage track was still visible on the road. Cassian was gone, but the threat he represented had only changed shape. House Veyron would not forget the humiliation. The crown would not ignore a village that could pay taxes in living weapons. Merchants would carry stories farther than Kael could control. Blackacre had won one battle. Now it had become valuable enough to attract wars. Kael gathered the villagers in the square and made his first real declaration as lord. Blackacre would pay its tax, not in coin it did not have, in frontier defense goods, foraged crops, reinforced timber, and emergency grain. Everything recorded, everything measured, everything tied to the charter so no marshal could call survival illegal again. Mira nodded once. That was approval. Nall asked if his job title could be Assistant Chief of Dangerous Vegetables. Kael told him they would discuss it after spelling lessons. For the first time, the village laughed without bitterness. Then a child near the north field screamed. Kael ran with Mira and Nall toward the burn scar. At the center of the black stones a new shoot had broken through the soil. It was dark red, almost black, with tiny scale patterns along the stem. The air around it was warm enough to melt the morning frost. Kael crouched beside it and felt the same vast heat from deep below. The plant was not attacking, it was waiting. Harvest pulsed in his palm, and beneath Blackacre the dead dragon's roots pulsed back. Kael understood then that the village had not been built on a battlefield by accident. It had been planted over one. And the next harvest would not grow swords. It would grow something the old empire had buried for a reason.